Joining us again with the Institute for Social Ecology in our ongoing series about race in the ecology. And we've been doing for the past year now, and some change actually, a real focus and deep dive on movements, social movements on the African continent in particular. I want to encourage anybody who's looking at this for the first time in light of some recent events, particularly the massacre in El Fasher, people reaching out, trying to understand some of what's going on in the Sudan. We did a 6-part series on the Sudan last year, and we covered a lot of topics, most of which are still relevant today. We're going to get into a bit of that because there's a deep international connection of which Kenya plays a part, unfortunately. So we'll get into a little bit of that with our guest Sungu Oyoo from WAMCO and many other formations. But I want to introduce or have them introduce themselves. You all know me. And we're visited by Sacagawea Hall. I don't know if you want to introduce yourself to everyone. They'll be joining us today.
Hey, Sacagawea Hall, better known as Saki, also known as Saki. I am with Cooperation Jackson, and I was actually a part of a program for activists that Mwamco co-hosted with TCDC, which is in Dutch. So translating TCDC is difficult. Like you say TCDC, right? um, in
Yeah,
Tanzania.
it's
And so it
the
was an activist
Training
residency.
Center for Development Cooperation.
Yes.
The Dutch. That's what you could
Our
say.
Dutch comrade.
My
When
name is
you're on,
this where I introduced
you're trying to
them?
find directions,
Yeah.
you can say,
In Tanzania. People will know what you're talking about. But yeah, go ahead and introduce yourself, Sungu.
Yes. My name is Sungu Oyoo. I'm a writer, an activist with the Kongamano la Mapinduzi, which is a political movement here in Kenya. But I think more importantly and quite relevant to this discussion, I'm part of MWAMCO, the Pan-African Popular Pedagogy Collective, and I'm really glad to be here.
All right. Well, let's we got a lot of ground to cover today. Um, since we are saying we are saying, I guess uh, all questions are now somewhat open. I don't know if you want to start with the first question that you had, because I think that'll lead us into
other
pretty
things.
much everything else.
Okay. Um, so we haven't talked in a while, and then I've obviously been following all the different things that are happening and the repression, right? And then like even how that impacts you individually. And then I heard that you were running for president of Kenya. And I was a little shocked, not completely, because I understand um the idea of seizing state power. And for me, there's a difference between like the rhetoric, ideology, conversation, like action around seizing power on the continent, compared to like African people on this side of the hemisphere or the world, right? Our hemisphere. So why are you running for president, Sungu?
Um, First and foremost, I'm part of a movement, Kongamano la Mapinduzi. And in our analysis within the movement, we realized because we've been in a period of political turmoil and political upheaval and mass protests and insurrections over the past 1.5 years or so, and I'll get back to that later. But when we did our collective analysis as progressive movements, progressive forces, we realized that the issues we are confronting on the street are political issues, are political problems, and they need new society that we were agitating for on the street. Then contest was one of the pathways that was available to us, and that is why, as a movement, we decided to toss ourselves into that political field and contest through the electoral process. And I'm fortunate to have been selected from within Kongamano la Mapinduzi, where I have served as the national spokesperson for the past 4 or 5 years for this process, this presidential race, and to run.
That makes sense.
And following up on that, given how Kenya is presently situated, in the capitalist world system, what do you think could be gained, by potentially becoming president? How, in particular, how are you going to fight off all the different constrictions placed upon the Kenyan state, by the forces of capital and by the imperialist powers? How would you steer it away from being another kind of just neo-colonial puppet state, puppet operation?
So can we break down a couple of those terms and pieces? Because you said the capitalists and you said imperialists. For people who are watching.
Yeah. I mean, well, I want to give Sungu as much time and space, but just for a bit of a breakdown, I think, let me make it clear that, Kenya sits at a vital crossroads for international trade, both land trade, but also seafaring trade. It's at the kind of the bottom of the Horn of Africa for those who may not be familiar with it, but it's a crossroads really for traffic going north, via the Nile, and through that, the border along South Sudan, Sudan, and then Egypt is one major route, and it's also a central point that takes you across through Central Africa, either through the Sahelian region or through the more rainforest region. And then, of course, all of the access points to the southern part of Africa. So there are some particular reasons, mainly geographic, why the British made Kenya a key part of their global empire. One could argue that it was strategic for them, as was having New York Harbor, why they seized that from the Dutch,
right?
As control of India and Sri Lanka, in particular, for control of transport and access. And by the capitalists, we mean, those who own and control capital in various forms. The most common form of that, most common expression of that in our day and age are the big financial institutions and the multinational corporations, which operate on a global scale beyond any borders or limits. And then there are the bodies which kind of protect these capitalists, protect their investments, protect their own and control of the means of production. And most of those are states, which serve as arbiters of them being able to own land, engage in contracts, engage in settlements and disputes.
Specifically, the imperialist states.
And the imperialist states. The imperialist states are those who have an excess of capital and turn that excess in the capital into military capacity, military might, which they then can enforce with their tanks, their planes, their gunboats. And there's only a few of those which it really exists. The United States being chief amongst them. But the British are also there. They still have a base in Kenya. But there's a growing number of them, which are playing in the field, which I want us to talk about. So there's Turkey, there's the UAE, Saudi Arabia, we can go on. So Kenya is subject to all of those in many different ways. And a lot of the different candidates have to or try to play one of these forces off to another to get the kind of the best gains, oftentimes for themselves more so than for the people. But That's a little breakdown from me, but now we want to, come back to the question, Sungu. In this context, what do you think, you and the movement could do to challenge this kind of this neo-colonial
The
positioning,
history
this history that Kenya
and
has been situated in?
and the cycle.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think you rightly asked it in terms of the neo-colonial position that the Kenyan state plays, because Kenya is a neo-colonial state, like you said, and the neo-colonial state is created in the image of the colonial state. In our context, it every day subjugates us. It condemns us to poverty. It condemns us to humiliation. It condemns us to death, because the instruments of violence in the hands of the state are directed at the people in such a way that they exist to protect the dominating patterns of property relations and other patterns around the interests of different classes of people, the industries, banks, and whatnot. Last year, when we went to the street in June of 2024 to protest against the finance bill, it was essentially because a whole generation had been pushed to the wall. A whole generation could see its future being snatched right before its eyes. And what we learned through that process, because it's one of the biggest processes that this generation has been involved in. One is that the people are the motive force of history. As all historical processes teach us, it is the people who create history. And if we look at the strategic ways in which our young people were able to escalate their organizing, the ways in which even among the masses, there was a qualitative leap, a leap in the collective consciousness of the nation, like that people started questioning certain things which, of course, activists and progressive organizations had been talking about for years, but which had never been part of the national discourse. For example, the role of the IMF in Kenya's development, the role of the World Bank, these multilateral institutions that practically continue to maintain colonial patterns of economics. And what I think what to a large extent made even imperialist powers like the United States to panic was that they have a foothold in Kenya militarily, financially, economically, and what? And people started, they were not only protesting against the Kenyan government, they were saying, what is the role of the American government, the US government? What is the role of these institutions? And so I think that process of having a leap in the collective consciousness also, in the midst of that process, we also learned that struggle is not an electric switch. Like the way you go to a wall, flick on a light bulb and the light comes on. Struggle is a protracted process. And for us, our struggle is a clash between two forces that are diametrically opposed to each other. On one side, we have the forces and systems and structures that
Wait, Sungu, it's going a little slower.
And
So
on
you
the
might
other
have
side,
to...
we have the oppressed. And even despite the gates, sorry? Can you hear me now?
So we can hear you. Can you start with the two sides again? We'd missed the side.
Oh, I was saying our struggle is a clash between two forces. And on one side, we have the institutions, or who we can call the oppressed people, which is where the majority of the Kenyan people lie. And so for us, what we learned, even though we came out to the streets in large numbers, we were able to learn that struggle is a protracted process. It's not like making noodles or something of the sort. It requires commitment. It requires strategy. And so even if we talk about the situation or the position of Kenya as a neo-colonial state, and us achieving this victory, I think one of the things we have to really have in mind, one is how to win, and two is how to safeguard the win, or if I might say, how to secure the revolution. Because I think winning is a process, but I think the hardest thing is maintaining, is not only arriving at the kind of society we want, but also maintaining the systems and the new worlds that we are birthing, such that they are not, the forces of reaction do not push back or try to overturn them. And we recognize these facts. And I think part of what will have to happen is for the movements to bring more people into their ranks, processes at the center of these revolutionary processes, because like Cabral reminds us, the people are our mountains. We organize within them, we create the revolution with them, and it is they who safeguard the revolution. But what you said is very correct, in that the Kenyan, if you look at Kenya's industry, whether it's the stock exchange, it's the major industries, they are in the hands of foreign finance. Foreign militaries have bases in Kenya, whether it's the interest given the geostrategic importance of Kenya. There is a lot of imperialist interest and imperialist investment inside this country, and they would of course love to protect their interest. But then, for us who live in this country, we have to struggle to go towards creating this new society that at least guarantees us dignity.
So I wanted to hone in a little bit more, right? Because what you said mirrors Kali's like breakdown of what we mean by capitalism, imperialism, and like the strategic position of Kenya on the continent. And I said cycle, right? Like history, all those things. And there are these two forces, and we missed the first part, but I think the second one that you said in terms of the oppressed people is like important, right? And why your political organization and the movement and the generation impacted, like that came out last year, really decided, it sounds like, that you would be the representative and run for president. So can you talk about the current administration, Ruto, and his administration, and like, I mean, so I guess walk us through, maybe not all the way from last year, but some examples of how that's looked in 2025, which is almost over.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah.
The Ruto regime basically is a continuation of previous regimes we've had in this country, at least in terms of repression, in terms of the condition, the prevailing economic conditions. But I think the only exception with the Ruto regime is that it has put everything on steroids. Everything has, the repression is like at a higher level compared to the previous regime. The economic conditions are bad. And I think to fully understand the Ruto regime, we have to move back a little bit. Like I mentioned earlier, there's always been this clash in Kenya. Kenya was a settler colony. And at the dawn of independence, one of the major questions was the land question, which remains unanswered to date. Because the land was taken from the people through the barrel of a gun. At in the early 1960s, when that transition towards the post-independence government was already in motion, during the Lancaster House negotiations between the British government and the incoming Kenyan state, there was this deal signed that the incoming government would buy 1 million acres of land from the British settlers who are departing. Never mind that the British settlers had taken it through the barrel of a gun. And for Kenya to buy back this land, Kenya was to take a loan of £2 million from a consortium of comprising three parties: Great Britain, West Germany, and the World Bank, £2 million in the 60s is a lot of money.
Yeah.
And Kenya finished repaying this debt issue at 80s or 90s. These are resources that could have gone basic infrastructure, housing, and all these things, drinking water. And so what then happens is that this process of extraction, in the same way that the colonial state was used to extract, humiliate, subjugate, the neo-colonial state has been used to extract and extract. The people have always been struggling. The people have always been struggling. In the 60s and 70s, movements that were against called the December 12th movement, the Mwakenya movement, the movement that got us, that got in the 80s and early 90s, the movement for multi-party democracy, the movement that birthed a new constitution in 2010. All these movements that sought a more just and more dignified society have always been struggling. And so Ruto, remember in the 80s when Kenya was at the height of repression, Kenya had a president called Daniel Moi. And Ruto is a political student of Daniel Moi because he was plucked when he was very young in his early 20s from the university and put into the youth league of the party, where they were key figures in ensuring Moi's re-election and slowing down the forward march of our people by literally making sure that the ruling party, which was detested by the majority of Kenyans, went back into power. And so when he rode into power in 2022, on the road into power in 2022, after having been vice president for 10 years in the previous administration, he literally took Kenya back 30 years, back to the 80s. We today have the same systems of repression. We have the same level of ethnic division that was there. And this is not to say that it had disappeared, but it has now been exacerbated because the British ruled this country through divide and rule. And so the politicians today have perfected that art of dividing and ruling. The violence is at an all-time high. Economic conditions in this country today are really bad. And so when Ruto, for example, the protests that took people to the streets were occasioned by a deal signed between the Kenyan government and the International Monetary Fund, which insisted on, which set structural benchmarks for privatization of state-owned enterprises. They're now selling everything, including the pipeline company, government buildings, key parastatals, food-producing parastatals. They're literally mortgaging our sovereignty. That deal also included scrapping of fuel subsidies and electricity subsidies. And so the cost of production has really gone up, especially for small businesses and running costs of these businesses. It also insisted on increase in university education, scrapping of education subsidies, which is why since Ruto came to power, the cost of education has gone up, has almost quadrupled, gone up 4 times or so in the public universities. So they scrapped the subsidies, raised the fees, then set up a commission to investigate the high cost of education in the universities. It's just it's a farce. It's a farce that's happening. I'm waiting to read the commission's report. So that basically is the situation in the country. But then I think we have always, for most years, Kenyans have lived under a repressive regime. But what differentiates this regime from past regimes is the fact that this regime does it on your face. Like you'll have legislators coming on TV and saying, we are going to do this, whether you like it or not. And they'll outline their plan. And that is what got people angry and angry and angry. And so last year, for example, when people went to the streets, they said, reject finance bill. The government came and said, no, don't reject, amend. People, then the new call of the protests became, reject, don't amend. When the government refused to listen, the people had to escalate strategically and just say, Ruto must go. because that was the only language they could understand. And saying that Ruto must go, the people are not referring to Ruto the individual. They were referring to Ruto and all the institutions that hold his power in place, that are used to make this violence, whether physical or economic, against the people. And so our people have continued struggling in various fronts, especially on the political fronts. Our young people on the streets again this year, we lost more lives, which is really sad, because this year we came out to demand for justice for those who were killed last year. On a day when we came out to demand for justice, more than 60 of our compatriots were gunned down. And so this regime has lost all respect for the sanctity of human life. I mean, it has never had respect for life, because even if you are not shot down in the street, you are going to die because there's no medicine in the hospital, or like something does not work somewhere. I mean, there's more than 1 million ways in which they're killing people, or people are falling in between the cracks. And so I think for us, we have a historical and also a generational responsibility to birth this new society that can accord us dignity. Saki, I think I forgot your question, so I'll end there. Yeah.
No, you didn't forget. It wasn't necessarily a question. I was asking you for like the specifics and talking about him and his regime and who's in power now, right? And I really like how some of you folks can go all the way back and bring it towards the history. You covered, like, I feel like you covered the 60s, the 70s, the 80s. And what you said was that you can't understand this part right here, right? 24, 25.
You got to understand this foundation
without that coming forward. And while you were speaking, I thought of the United States, right? Because you said that the politicians were actually coming on the media and switching it up. It wasn't like playing on words and that kind of thing. It was telling you what we're gonna do, and it doesn't matter what, right? And we've seen that shift in the United States also, right? And ironically, we already talked about the relationship between the US and Kenya and the imposition that the US as an imperialist state has in Kenya, right? So, but I also thought about Haiti because you talked about the debt, and you broke up a little bit, so I didn't hear what year that debt was actually paid. But when you said the amount and what the amount was then compared to now, like, it still sounded like, without me knowing the date, that sounded like a whole lot of money, and it sounded like more money than what they said Haiti had to pay to France. But that was so long ago that you can't even, it's no point in even comparing and trying to figure out the dollars, right? Or the pounds or the this. You know what I'm saying? Like,
continues to grow.
well, yeah, it continues to grow, which keeps you in debt, but then also they don't count the difference between the price of milk 10 years ago and the price of milk now. I'm using that as an analogy, right? So I thought about the US and I thought about Haiti, and I actually want to see which way you want to go.
Well, I mean, we could go there. There's a couple of different things. I mean, I think the critical thing is
because I'm Haitian, I would go to Haiti first.
We can come there. I mean, I think, but the critical piece to me, and I think for the audience to understand, like why sometimes, at least in our series, we really try to ground these political questions in history. Because if you don't understand, for instance, that Ruto had been the vice president for a decade, and that he was part of, a regime that goes back to the 1980s, you will be confused in thinking that his new rhetoric, like he came and he touted himself that he was the hustler president, right? And that he was speaking to a younger generation and he was speaking to a younger movement. He may have had some good salesmanship, but the actual forces, the people that he's aligning with, the businesses that he helped nurture and that
internally and externally.
And they had both expectation, claims, and relationships, and
right.
Things that they wanted to see move forward, things they wanted to see extended, and that they supported him with resources, with their political capital in order to make things move. And if we don't understand that, then we get lost oftentimes, and not seeing the continuities of how things are moving in the different threads that we really have to dismantle and destroy. And if
globally,
we want things to move.
yeah.
And so, like one of the critical
Yes.
things, like with Ruto in particular, um, the Obama having some, connections to Kenya via his father. For those who may not have known that, his father was Kenyan. He kind of rearticulated, particularly the last 4 years of his administration, of his regime. He kind of tried to set Kenya up to be much more of an intervening force, and tried to give them more material rewards for getting in closer with the United States in its competition with China as a global rival. And it played a number of different roles for imperialism. Like an intervention force in Somalia. You know, which on the western side of the hemisphere, of the world, excuse me, may not be that well known. Well,
Or
Obama,
people thinking it's important.
yeah, Biden um,
Mm.
tried to reward Kenya with an intervening force in Haiti, right? And I want folks to kind of look at it. It's like, if you do this for us,
Yeah, it's
right, we will give more contracts, more favored nation status, more trade. Those were some of the things that they promised Ruto. And for those who don't know, there are Kenyan forces in Haiti now. Where is where's Ruto's interventionist politics? How is that playing out, in Kenya right now, Sungu? Because I know that there were protests, that the movement there last year were raising, and we did a series. Folks can go back and look at it.
Pan-African, like thinking of it in a context of Pan-Africanism, right?
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Where does
Yeah.
that stand right now, Sungu? In terms of the politics in Kenya. Are folks? Is there still a movement trying to oppose this police force or get it to pull back? Where does that stand?
The police force in Haiti,
The Kenyan intervention
right?
force in Haiti.
The troops.
Yeah.
Before I get to where it is now, I think we should start from the context within which those forces were deployed to Haiti. There was a big propaganda push by the Kenyan government and other powers external to Kenya, to paint Haiti as a failed state that is controlled by gangs. And so when these police were deployed, Ruto actually spoke and said this was an act of Pan-Africanism, because he said Kenyan police were being deployed to go stand with the people of Haiti. And it's really important to look at that language and how it was couched. But of course, we know that this is an occupying force acting on behalf of American imperialism, only that it was better PR to have black faces and black boots on the ground, and also because America had been engrossed in a lot of wars and occupations, and so they needed a proxy to do it on their behalf. Public sentiment in Kenya, to be honest, is still divided. There is a movement opposed to it, but then we must never forget that that propaganda, which was given out at the beginning, continues to be reinforced within Kenya and even outside of Kenya. And so you will find a few Kenyans who support it. The main bone of contention at this particular moment is that there is quite a number of Kenyan police who are sent to Haiti, who have lost their lives there, and the government has no clue on how to deal with their families. Their families are every other day on the news asking for their loved ones, actually demanding for the remains. They're saying, okay, just give us the remains, and then we will bury our people. So, and the state has never even told them officially that their people died. I think it's when Ruto went to some meeting where there was money. I don't, either in the US or in Europe, We just saw a video clip of him saying, we've also lost people in Haiti, and he mentioned names. That's the first time the families knew that their kin had been killed. You can see how callous these people are. Because they had gone there to argue that they needed more money. So they came with a whole list of people. The families had it in the news of those killed. And so, of course, this is an occupying force. It is not sustainable at all. The problems of Haiti are really deep in that Haiti is one of those places in the world that imperialism has made every effort to ensure that it does not develop. They've used all tricks in the book. And I think part of it is the humiliation that they got from the struggle for Haiti's independence and when the enslaved people freed themselves. And so Haiti is one of those places that has always been used as an example and exploited. I think it's like the template. They're trying to show the whole world, move against us and we will reduce you into another Haiti. And then punishment. In today's world, we have a black force going to, it's punishment, going to occupy another African country. And so I think when we talk of sovereignty and even when we talk of Pan-Africanism, we really have to be clear because what is today being framed, we live in a world where occupation is being framed as Pan-Africanism, like in the case of Haiti. We live in a world where there's a class of people, a comprador class, who are willing to go to any extent. And I hope we'll also get a chance to discuss the case of Sudan and even the Congo, because Kenya has become, like you mentioned correctly, an interventionist force across many territories, across many countries, including neighboring countries in the region. And I don't think it really pans out well for us, because like under the Biden administration, Kenya was designated as a non-NATO ally status. I have no idea what that means, but somehow they were like an elevated African country. And so
I didn't know either.
And part of what this means is, for example, when for example, if the Americans are to arrest the Houthis in Yemen, Ansarallah, they're supposed to be jailed and tried and jailed in Kenyan jails. And you know, Yemen, we are only separated by Somalia and the Gulf of Aden. So it's not really wise on our part, because we are getting into many potential conflicts, creating enemies we did not have, instead of focusing on processes of social development and creating a society that works for us. But then the state is captured, and there's these lackeys who are at the top of it, people like Ruto and others, and they're willing to do anything to please their masters across the ocean.
So who?
But just real quick, because I think it is important. So that particular designation.
Oh, right. Well,
that designation, it gives you more trade benefits. It gives you it used to, pre-Trump, gives you an ability to, or that country and those who it designates, it gives them a way to avoid certain tariffs imposed by the United States on international trade, more favored status in shipping and priorities in ports. But I would say the most important thing is it allows that country to have a greater access to the range of weaponry that the United States sells and exports. Because they keep a limitation on what type of fighter pilots, what type of drone pilots, what type of guns, what type of ammunition that anybody can get, so that they can maintain their military superiority. So if you get a more favored status, that means you get more access to more of their equipment that you have to buy from them. But you get more access to it to become a more lethal force. As what's the Hegseth is always now talking about, the lethality. He wants to increase the lethality of the United States force. That is, he's saying openly what these treaties actually guarantee one to be able to do.
What you don't get, though, is to be in NATO.
NATO, it's the closest thing to being in NATO, but I mean,
but you're not.
Well, that's
That's the
from
point.
our
I mean,
perspective,
you're not white,
that's a good
so
thing.
When I
you can't be neutral
when
if
I
you're
heard
not white.
the term,
Yeah.
when I heard the term, I was like, huh? And then when I had to think about it and break it down, I'm like, I understand where NATO is originally and who's trying to get in, who's being blocked. So basically, you get all those benefits that you mentioned, which are not in benefit or the interest of the majority of the people in Kenya, and you actually don't get the benefit of
Well, the
maybe the benefit of the US having to, or anybody else in NATO having to come and intervene and help you.
right. That's
what it is.
well
Mhm, mhm.
the thing is
You actually,
That's why
they
it blew my
actually
mind.
make you, they make you intervene on behalf of imperialist interests, but do not offer you guarantees, security guarantees in return.
right.
Yep.
Which if folks think we're
Which
just
is
banting,
heightening during
just put in context Israel attacking Qatar, right? And while Israel felt it was within its rights, to hit another U.S. ally, where there is the largest U.S. Sea base in the region,
yeah,
right? That they felt that they just could go take out people there, and you see there's a reworking now that's taking place where Trump
he kind of
made,
crossed the line a
yeah.
little.
Well, we'll see.
Well,
But what I want to bring,
Trump did say things
he
on
made
the
Netanyahu
media.
give the Emir a call, which was somewhat unprecedented. But we need to put that in context because Kenya plays. I want to come to this part, Sungu, because Kenya plays a critical role here. That I want us to
critical
try
role,
to
focusing on like the middle, so-called Middle East.
oh, just not just the Middle East.
Oh, okay.
It's like it. So, the United Arab Emirates, the UAE.
Oh, right.
I want to move us there because there's a particular role. The United Arab Emirates is supporting the Rapid Support Forces, the RSF, in the Sudan in this ongoing, fucked up war. Probably, there's outside of,
war.
if you want to call it that.
I mean, that's what people understand in terms of like,
yeah,
in the country.
I think it's a counter revolution folding in on itself. That's the way I've described it, and will continue to describe it because there was actually a people's revolution that occurred there in 2019.
Right.
Which overthrew the Bashir regime.
Right.
They struggled to come to terms or to fully push out the military, and then two different sections of the military came together to crush the people's movement, and then fought amongst themselves over who was going to control the spoils.
So wait, can you say? So you said you frame it as, and it was like a short phrase.
It's a counter revolution. Okay. It's a counter, and why I say that, and we can get in, a conversation, because the United States, France, the UK, and Germany in particular, with the support of all the Arab states, came in and intervened against the people's movement in 2021 and 2022 in Sudan to force a compromise with the military, right? To keep a military government installed and allow this military government to then suspend the rule of the people in so-called democratic transition.
Right.
And so they did everything they could to intervene and put pressure both on the movement and on the military to a certain extent to come up with an outcome that they wanted. Now they act in the midst of this civil war as if they cannot intervene.
Yep.
Right. And which is complete BS because what you have are the Turks on the one side, United Arab Emirates on another, Saudi Arabia on another, Egypt on another, keeping this conflict going by arming the two different sides and trying to support two different sides and controlling, the resources of the Sudan in particular. The UAE, their main thing is gold, right? And extracting a lot of the gold that exists in Sudan, right? Of which there's a fair amount there for folks to be clear on. And the piece I want us to get into is that, there's been a lot of reporting and just a lot of basic common knowledge, given the nature of investment of the various kind of Gulf Emirates, if you would, into Kenya. There's a lot of investment of Gulf countries into Kenya, and there's a lot of historical. Well, that's why I'm kind of giving this context. I mean, it's known in Kenya. It may not be known in the rest of the world, right? And including going back to the slave trade, of which there was an extensive slave trade on the coast that goes back to some of the to particularly to Oman and to Yemen in that relationship, which has been very tense and very contradictory at different points in time.
And specifically
But
East
but
Africa.
Ruto,
Yeah.
there's a lot of reporting, and just to come to the question, there's a lot of reporting that Ruto is supporting the arms shipments or facilitating arms shipments to be moved from the UAE into the RSF via, the Mombasa and other ports in Kenya, right? And this highlights kind of Kenya's role, getting back to that point about its neo-colonial status, but also its role as an interventionist force, or at least an enabling force on the continent. And so there's a question of where does that stand in the movement, and then the since we opened some questions up, the thinking that you and others have about how you're going to deal with this very destructive force in the contest for political power, like how to make this more of a political issue with all the dangers that it entails, because they are not immune to assassinating people in their history. None of these forces, the Israelis or the Gulf states, particularly on the African continent. So that's the issue I want us to tackle, and to give us your assessment of where this stands, Sungu.
Of course, Kenya has been backing the RSF. Hamdan Dagalo, the leader of the RSF, is commonly called Hemeti. Hemeti has been in Nairobi severally. He's even been hosted in State House at the beginning of last year, I think. At the beginning of 2025, the RSF held a meeting in Nairobi, huge conference, where they were supposed to declare parallel government, formation of a new Sudanese government within Nairobi. And so none of these things can happen. You can't have such a militia that has committed such atrocities in the world and in history in the Darfur region and other parts of Sudan, holding this meeting and its whole top leadership being present without the express support of the Kenyan state. The Kenyan state, like we said, is acting on behalf of its masters to transfer weapons to them, to facilitate them diplomatically and in other ways. And of course, like you mentioned, the interest of the UAE, which is one of the parties that is fueling this ongoing crisis. The UAE has been supplying weapons through Kenya and through other countries, but then the UAE is also operating some secret bases in Somalia, through which these weapons are landed to Kenya and other countries and transported there. But then the conflict in Sudan also has a spillover to Libya and other countries in North Africa, because the RSF operates across borders. We have to take that into account. One major hint through which you can know that this is about gold and about extraction and about resources, basically the spoils of war, is that the gold exports, Kenya's gold exports tripled between May and June of this year. If you compare it to last year, Kenya's gold exports tripled. And so at any time when the violence spikes, the gold exports triple. So they tripled. Now we have a genocide. Because the gold must be extracted, exported through a different government, and then that money can be used to ship in weapons. So between May and June, those exports are tripled. And it's not like they discovered a new mine in Kenya.
Right.
Yeah.
Actually, Kenya produces a negligible amount of gold. So even what Kenya was already reporting is mind-boggling. In previous years, we're exporting this, and people are like, but we don't really see gold mines. But we are a huge gold exporter, and suddenly they triple. And so it's about these resources. It's about these spoils of war. And for me, this extends beyond Sudan, because the border between Sudan and Libya, if you look at the volatility there, and this gold is also used to fund part of, because what the EU has done, the European Union, is that to stop migration, is that they've enlisted some of the militias in the Sahara to literally capture those who are trying to flee through the Mediterranean and hold them in these modern day slave camps and even sell them as prisoners. And it is these very resources, these African resources, that should be developing the continent, that are being used to fund all these conflicts, all these militias, and all these things. And so it really is a dangerous situation, a tenuous situation. And both the RSF, the Janjaweed, and the Sudanese armed forces, both of them are using gold and other resources to finance the war. So whoever is backing them, or whichever countries are behind them, are also getting their share of all these points, while Sudanese people are rotting in refugee camps. Sudanese people are undergoing genocide. You saw what happened in Al-Fashar. 1,500 people killed. 1,500 people killed. At least that's what Al Jazeera was saying. The figure could be higher because no one has gone and verified it. Like, how do you have 1,500 killed in 3 days? Just 3 days. And 1.5 years ago in that same area, 14,000 people were killed. 1.5 years ago in that same area. Like, African lives have become so cheapened, so dispensable. Like, no one really gives, like, Africans can be killed at any time and the world can move on as normal, in the same way that they're saying Palestinians can be killed at any time and life can move on as normal. I think we have to change this. And part of the process of changing this, to get back to your question, is one, to take back our sovereignty and ensure that the institutions of the Kenyan state are not used to facilitate this wars, this conflict, this endless and senseless violence in the region. The other time you saw the Congo, they call themselves the Congo River Alliance, which has all these armed groups in the Congo. And at some point, even M23 was part of them. They held a huge conference in Nairobi to negotiate. Was it around unity? They were negotiating how to unite. And so Nairobi really is one of those places that is fomenting conflict across this whole region. And of course, all this is on behalf of imperialism and the dominant economic and military powers in the world.
And I'm going to mention again the multinational corporations, because we started with like that partnership, right? And then we've been talking about the state. So I actually had a question to make sure that I understood correctly, because so Kenya is acting as like a weapons hub and getting, exporting, benefiting, and the gold that's in the Sudan, because you mentioned like how that was one of the like resources that actually
Gold,
provides
oil, some Arabic
money, right? So Kenya's increased because they're also exporting the gold to Kenya and then being able to use it to export and then have money for Kenya. Is that what you were saying? How did
I would say so in
Kenya's
that
gold triple when you said it was the gold in Kenya before was negligible? Am I understanding that?
of course, it's the gold from Sudan.
It's a gold.
Okay, I'm making sure that I
The
understood
gold is
that whole
Sudan.
process.
Yeah,
It's only on the records where it's tripled, but we can't speak of any increase in the production of gold in
Right.
Kenya. So the only logical conclusion is that this is gold
Yeah.
from Sudan and other
Right.
countries that are in conflict. But the
Yeah.
coincidence in this instance is that just 2 months before, 3 months before the fighting escalated, Kenya's gold exports just went up and up and up. And I think it is these resources that are then used to procure these weapons and which are then transported back again via Kenya to these conflict zones.
Yeah.
And we want to be, this is getting to be more clear and specific, you know, so it's the Kenyan exchange, like in the stock market.
Yeah. Yeah.
And international players exist on that stock market. And
Yeah.
in those exchanges, they actually dominate them.
Yeah. And big old individuals.
Yeah.
I won't name names.
So, you know, when something's saying it's being, you know, this much gold is being
Yeah.
exported from Kenya,
Yeah.
right? It's not like it's the Kenyan people. It's the businesses that are registered to do
Right.
business in Kenya, right?
Yeah.
That this is now being counted towards their GDP, the gross domestic,
Right, yeah.
you know, product,
Which is
and the reflection
probably
of the growth.
inflated, but they don't give the accurate reporting of how many people actually died in 3 days in Sudan, like Sungu mentioned. And I mean,
Mhm.
so I mean, for me, the reason why one, I wanted to make sure I understood it correctly, and two, that's the part that I think is horrific for me to hear, because I mean, not because I've learned, I think a good amount of people, not everybody, knows about like the extraction of the continent, because the continent has so many throughout the whole, like all the countries throughout the landmass. Um, but to hear about the um level of current extraction from one continent, that I know one country that experienced that is still experiencing it from another like neighbor, is I I do know it. I know
And it's
know
only,
what's happening, and those different things, and like
yeah.
even with the relationship of, like, I think of like South America, Central South America, but to hear you be specific around like the numbers, and then to relate that to like the weapons, is, it's disturbing to me.
And then the politics. I mean, because
Yeah.
one of the things that to me that I want to that I'm glad to
US
see
panic.
that I'm glad to see is now starting to emerge.
Yeah.
You know, that at least in the UK, parts of Europe, Canada, not so much in the United States yet. Hopefully, it's something we got to work on. But
Yeah.
there's been a significant amount of protests around this recent massacre in El Fasher on an international level. And I'm very pleased, if you would, to see, particularly in the UK, and I think it was also in France, that folks went and protested at the United Arab Emirates, at the UAE consulates and embassies, you know, demanding that they, you know, be tried with crimes against humanity and charged with their particular role.
Yeah.
And people made the connection, particularly at the one in the UK. I
Yeah.
saw that there were some Palestinian activists who made the connection about, you know, particularly Qatar and UAE's role in their alliance with the United States as like dishonest brokers around Palestine and the so-called peace
Yeah.
agreement, and like why the so-called Arab regimes have been so complicit,
Yeah.
right, in the genocide of the Palestinian people, in like
Whether
how
it's
the United
like
States is like, we're going to reward you
Yeah.
for you know, participating in the genocide
Yeah.
by enabling you to carry out a genocide of your own in an African country,
Right.
and people making the connection. Like I was
Or
very
completely
pleased.
stay silent.
Yeah, I was glad to see that you know, a younger generation is really making these ties and
Yeah.
these connections, because that's how we're going to have. That's, you know, to me, all of this, what I'm trying to do with all this is educate a U.S. audience about what's going on the continent. But my aim and objective is about building a real internationalist movement, a real anti-imperialist movement.
Yeah.
Right, because we're not. In my piece is like we're not going to the piece around going back around the neo-colonial nature of the Kenyan state. Like without an internationalist movement, Kenya's always going to be subject to more powerful forces.
Yeah.
If there aren't forces in other countries which are
Right.
standing up and raising the banner,
Right.
right, of like, no, you cannot intervene here,
Yeah.
you cannot intervene there. and then we can extract certain concessions through general strikes, through other type of focused targeted strikes in the respective countries that we live in, blocking aid shipments, blocking market extraction, blocking all those different things. We got to get to that level, but we first have to understand the connections. And so I want to move now to
Well,
one piece before we end. Go ahead.
So yes, that, because Sungu talked about what needs to happen post an election, right? Like, let's say you win. And then the job is like protecting that, keeping that, sustaining that. And the international piece is critical, because you all gonna need some allies who understand and also like feel strongly and connected, and like solidarity in a way that isn't like, oh, I heard this tragedy happen, so I'm gonna post a petition on Facebook, or like,
No,
or like talk about solidarity in a way where, yes, you want to have solidarity, but there aren't instruments and people and institutions to even support being able to have that concrete solidarity.
Material impact.
So yeah, I mean, I'll let you go to where you were gonna go, but I feel like how does that happen in the United States compared to those places, when like folks are like, do we and can we protest Trump and his regime?
Well, we have to. I mean,
of course we have to. And I'm just like, that is another, it's another distraction. Like, there's a level of distraction internally, and then there's the level of the impact of that distraction on how we understand, relate, shift our consciousness in order to bolster that internationalism and the class solidarity and
we have to
all
build
those
that
things.
because I mean
I'm
I think,
rolling my eyes, but I agree. And
well, and part of
it
it is
makes me feel
this,
like
this education work that we're trying to do and making these conversations. Like hopefully, folks who are listening here get a deeper understanding of not only what's happening in Kenya, but how Kenya is strategically kind of located, in the world. And part of the thing that we always need to do in drawing out these conversations is find ways that we can intervene here in the United States where we are, right? Because it's not like there aren't military interests that we can protest here. There's not like, or take action again. It's not like there's not corporate, interests things that as we build a movement here that we could target,
especially in the South.
to have a material impact. And now we have to, like part of the thing we need to really kind of hone in on, and we'll do another conversation about that. But we need to talk about what is the real base of this rhetoric around intervening in Nigeria, right? It's not by accident that Trump is targeting two major oil producing countries, Venezuela and Nigeria. That's not by accident at all.
And paying countries in both places to take in and imprison people from the United States.
Or trying to anyway.
Well, I mean,
yeah.
we already have
in Nigeria. In Nigeria, there is two major questions. One is the oil question, and who gets the drilling rights, because the Chinese have also they now have quite a foothold there in terms of resource extraction. But secondly, is also the loss of influence that the West has had, especially in the Sahel.
Right.
And so Nigeria, an unstable Nigeria creates a good entry point back into that whole region. Yeah. So it's ultimately about resources, extraction, and domination.
And reshifting alliances. They have to pick good places.
I never knew Trump loved Christians so much.
Yeah.
Well, because they treat the Black Christians here in the United States so well, you would think that, that there'd be some protection for Black Christians in the United States if they're so concerned. stop bombing black churches and taking the killers, who people who kill black folks in church, which actually happened during his watch,
Yeah.
and then take them to Burger King on the way to being booked. Remember that little boy who went up, shot up they picked him up, put him in chains. He said he was hungry. They took his ass to Burger King. No joke, to eat.
Yeah. It could have been
And
McDonald's.
then took him in.
So
right?
so I thought that and I wrote this down. We're not going to go back to this part of what we were talking about, but I thought that when you said it was US panic, that that stuck out to me also, cuz what we talk about here a lot is like what happens when the empire is actually crumbling, and
It is
most
panic. Yeah.
empires, all empires in history, like end up
All.
falling, right? So that stuck out. And then you guys are talking about like religion. So
Religion
you want to
being
talk I mean, but hold on, because there's also the whole like East African well, I think continent wide, but we're talking about East Africa, right? Like Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, and those are the parts that I know better when it comes to what's happening and the repression against like queer people.
Well, that's part of where I was going to go. Just if you can break down like what has been transpiring like this year in particular. We've seen Uganda, we've seen Kenya, we've seen now Tanzania, really doing a level of coordinated repression, amongst those three states, targeting queer activists, including lawyers, right, advocates, folks you would think would have a certain level of protection, from the state or from the law, and they're doing so across borders. Where was it? Tanzania picked some people up from Uganda, and Kenya picked some people up from Tanzania, and then here recently,
and
with
creating
all the violence
law.
and yeah, all the violence that's been going on in Tanzania around these elections. Help us make sense of this, Sungu, because it's not what's
I
not being
think,
talked about is the
of course,
funding and the Christian funding from the United States that's a part of this.
And it supports that
There's,
cultural part and all of
there's a very coordinated move. There's a very coordinated move, especially in East Africa, because you look at the laws being presented before the parliaments, they're basically copy pasted word for word. They just substitute Kenya with Uganda or Tanzania. But if you read through the law, it's basically the same law being taken by different parliamentarians to the parliaments. And of course, we have the money behind this is coming from the US. Is coming from mostly the evangelical movement, the Christian fundamentalist movement in the US, uh, which, after causing enough problems in the US, has now turned Africa into their playground and have found allies on the African continent who they can pay off to push this agenda, one, at a legislative level, second, at a social and cultural level. So you now find, right now they're financing everyone across board. There's even imams in the mosques who they are funding directly to push an anti-LGBTIQ agenda. And so, and they're even funding some of the organized groups at community level or at national level, like the Christian Professionals Forum, and all these things. And I think really for us on the African continent, our greatest problem, or rather our greatest desire at this moment, is to live lives of peace, lives of justice, lives of dignity. We do not really have time to look at the people's right to love, who people want to love and how they want to love them. That they want to reduce our entire struggle as African people as a struggle which at its center has those who identify as queer as the core of our problem, as if the problem that Africa faces is a moral problem. No, it is an economic problem because there is internal and external forces that are at play. And so for us in the movement, of course, we stand with our brothers, sisters, and all other human beings who feel like they can love anyone who's around them. And that is part of the struggle within our larger struggle, the identity struggle. And of course, we offer them unconditional solidarity. But then the Christian fundamentalist movement has really made inroads on the African continent. It has really, even at government level, if you look at the amounts of money that are now flowing into the African continent to push an anti-gay agenda, it really is disheartening. Tanzania has been doing it too, and now East Africa has become like a template. Each country is almost a perfect template of the other. So one, we have this legislation, anti-LGBTIQ legislation. Second, we've had this wave of cross-border kidnappings across the country and general repression on the population because the whole region is so restless and the young people are demanding for better societies, for better worlds, for opportunities. The youth unemployment rate in Kenya, where right now I'm at the Mashujaa archives, which is, I'll explain it later, but which is in Kenya, but the youth unemployment rate is at 67.7% in Kenya. This generation literally is watching their whole future go almost 70%. The generation is watching its future sliding right before its eyes. At the same time, education costs are going higher, cost of living is going higher, and all these things. And so there's a lot of restlessness across the region. And there's been a lot of agitation by people, progressive organizations, political parties across the whole of East Africa. Across the whole of East Africa. In Uganda, the opposition leader, Kizza Besigye, is in jail, facing treason trial. He was abducted in Kenya and taken there. In Tanzania, opposition leader Tundu Lissu is in jail, facing treason trial. In Rwanda, the opposition leader Ingabire is in jail, facing treason trial. In South Sudan, the opposition leader Riek Machar is in jail or under house arrest, facing treason trial. It's like if you decide to oppose the state, that is treason. In Burundi, there is no opposition. The parliament has 100 members, all 100 come from the ruling party. They've basically decimated the opposition. In Kenya, we are not sure who is government, who is opposition, because the parties keep crossing over and over. The opposition party,
that's what I wanted
main
to ask
opposition
you.
party in the last election, ODM. Right now, ODM, which was the opposition party 2 years ago, no election has been held. The former deputy party leader of ODM is finance minister, energy minister, and they also given another ministry, key one, of mining, I think. And what happened is that at the height of the protests, because as a class, both of them are part of the elite, their interests were threatened, and they came together and agreed that we share these positions in government, and then we deal with the young people who are on the streets. And so they betrayed a whole generation, the opposition in Kenya.
So wait.
And ended up basically
Sungu,
dancing.
Pause.
Go on.
Because like your screen froze, but we could still hear you. And then it was a key moment, and
you said,
we couldn't hear you.
You said they said you should share these positions, and then it stopped. So we lost a section there.
Ah, okay. So because Ruto was on his way out, his ship was sinking, and when the largest opposition party decided to work with him and to secure his sinking regime by lending its support, the only condition was that give us half of what you are getting from this government, because these people view government as a tool of extraction. So the opposition was awarded, and they still have these ministries: the Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Energy and Petroleum, Ministry of Mining, like they went for where the money is, and because Ruto was on a sinking ship, he had no alternative but to give them these key ministries. And so we really do not have a political opposition in terms of the political parties in Kenya at this moment. But then what happened is that the young people who had been on the streets were playing the role of an opposition, so to speak, which is why the Ruto regime has clamped down on the movements, progressive organizations and movements, on young people across the country. A lot of young people who are arrested on the streets have been presented in court. I've been to court a few times, seeing comrades presented charges of terrorism, and these are serious charges. Charges of arson, charges, and these are people who are arrested on the street protesting. But the regime has just decided to punish a whole population. And so there is we have a club of dictators across East Africa who have decided that they will offer each other support, like with the violence in Tanzania now. You see Ugandan forces have been there, and they've been part of some of the atrocities we've witnessed. We are now starting to receive news. The other day, Chadema, the main opposition party in Tanzania, which boycotted the election because they refused. They were barred from contesting the election because they refused to sign the code of conduct for the election. Chadema said 700 people or more had died since Wednesday when the voting happened, Wednesday last week. And that 700 people, like when Africans die, like they can just die in large numbers and the world moves on. And so, because Tanzania is a very sad case, and which brings us to the role of the individual. Under Nyerere and even in subsequent administrations, too much power was put in the presidency. And the presidency, Nyerere, for instance, never abused it, though his office had power. If he had decided to abuse it, he could have. Tanzania now has a president who is using these powers in a very retrogressive way. For example, under Tanzanian law, the president appoints the electoral commission, all members. No one vets, no one does anything, and tells them, go conduct an election. The opposition came and said, no reforms, no election. We must reform the electoral commission. We must have constitutional reform. They were asking for some basic reforms. She said no. Okay, and barred them from contesting the election. And so when they boycotted the election, Tundu Lissu, the opposition leader, was arrested and tried for treason. And the of course, this electoral result, which was announced, the commission announced, which she appointed, announced that she'd won with 97%. They announced it either yesterday or the day before, with 97%. But of course, it's not a legitimate result. And so there really is a huge governance problem, which is why when I started, I mentioned that in our analysis, we realized that a huge chunk of our problem is political, and it will need a political solution, which is why we in Kenya, the progressive organizations, Kongamano la Mapinduzi, which I'm part of, together with other organizations, which have now come together under the banner of the Kenya Left Alliance, which is why we are saying we will contest power. We will use that process, one, to test our ideas among the people, two, to create a radical transformation in the way this country is governed, and to birth this new society, because that old Kenya simply does not work for us and our generation. All it does is take and take some more.
Yeah. Any of the generations that are still alive right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I got more, but I do want to.
Time do we have?
That was only try to do like an hour and a half, and we're getting close to and it's getting late on for Sungu. For the folks, the two folks who have stuck with us, thank you for sticking with us. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat, and we can take those now before we close out. But just want to give folks an opportunity to raise some questions. Thank you for tuning in, Caroline.
Who says thank you so much for this presentation with the exclamation mark, Sungu.
And thanks for joining.
Well, Sungu, I wanna have you. Uh, they asked the question: did you speak about the political repression your group is facing? You did a little bit early on, but not in great detail. If you want to touch on that.
Political party, is that?
Kongamano, I would just say the progressive groups or progressive movements in Kenya, in general, have been have been uh, have been facing repression in Kenya since the protest broke out last year. A lot of our comrades have been arrested. A lot have been presented in court facing trumped up charges. We have lost a lot of our compatriots. We lost more than 60 in last 2 weeks of June and first 2 weeks of August last year. No, first 2 weeks of July, I mean. Same to this year again, when we went back to the streets, we again lost more than 50 of our compatriots. And so there's been abductions, killings, and all these things. But I think for us, one of the things which we've had to recognize is that nothing good ever really comes without struggle. Nothing good ever really comes without struggle. And we recognize the role that those generations that came before us played, like the way in which they were able to birth this society where, in as much as we enjoy these limited freedoms, we are not living under colonial order or the brutal dictatorship of the 80s and whatnot. And so, yes, there is repression, but then, the dialectic of history is that repression breeds resistance. So as repression escalates, the levels of resistance, the levels of progressive activities, whether it's educational activities, whether it's people coming out on the streets, have also gone up at the same time. And which is why when the movement sat and did a historical analysis, like I mentioned, they said that the decision of the movements in the 80s not to contest for political power was a wrong decision, because that is how we ended up with the current forces of reaction in power. And which we said that this is a historical moment, the unity of the left, in that there is many tactics and strategies that we can use to get to this society we are trying to create or even to imagine. And so, of course, the protests continue, there's legal actions, there's educational activities, but then the election is one of the pathways we are going to use at this time. But then we're also doing that with full cognizance that participating in the elections is a tactic, not a strategy. It is a tactic, not a strategy. Yes, it is a tactic. But then, because we have this huge segment of the population which really has no political home it fits within, and a lot of organizations, even including those which decided not to participate in the last election, are now saying that in this historical moment of left unity, one of the ways to test our strength and our ideas is through the elections, which is why we are contesting. And the Kenya Left Alliance has so far succeeded in bringing together these progressive organizations, charting together a common path through, which is outlined in our minimum program, which is a document I can share, and our political program of action, and as read against our electoral strategy and how we view this electoral process. And so that is where we are at this point. And I think we must win. We either win or we win. We do not have many alternatives on our plate, because this is for our generation, this is one of those decisive moments where we have to break away from the forces of repression and birth this new society. It's that historical moment where we declare that the old Kenya is dead. But then if the old Kenya is dead and we do not build this new Kenya, we are not part of the processes of birthing this new Kenya, then we will essentially have created a vacuum. But what we want is a new and radiant society, a new and radiant world that can at least ensure that there is joy. Sometimes we forget the simplest things in life, that there is joy, that there is love, that there is laughter, that there's dignity, most importantly, dignity.
I feel like that we just looked at each other. I feel like that's a great note to end on, and I actually happened to look at the time too. I have more. I mean, there's probably always more. Especially thinking about us here. So I'm like, anyone watching, or not only now, but when we post it, this is like, to me, a mirror that you have to contend with and think about and look at for where we are in the United States now. And the whole thing around the belly of the beast here in the international world, and like when we're engaged in things either focused on Pan-Africanism or internationalism, it's like, oh yeah, we're in the belly of the beast. We have to be doing something here because it impacts everywhere. And like the belly now is like, it's like the small intestine compared to the big intestine. It's like getting deeper, and I like it. I don't.
They're cracks.
Well, like I am pessimistic right now, and I usually have a good dose of both and probably more optimism. But I'm pessimistic right now about people really thinking and realizing that, and knowing what it was like for so many people across class.
That's why we're going to do this series that I want to
women,
encourage
it's
everybody
like,
to check out. This Trump, I Do Mind Dying
Yes.
series. I want to encourage everybody who may look at this to check it out, because part of that is very specifically, all this is for anybody to consume, but specifically for a U.S. audience and a younger, my generation and younger, who, we are the generation who we know about the poverty that our people came out of, and many unfortunately are still within, but we didn't know the direct repression of the entire community. We saw the movement be repressed,
Yeah.
but that's different than all of the people being repressed. And so
Right.
now we're at a stage now.
And you might know that your grandmother
Yeah.
was like, or your great grandmother, like, I mean, experienced something way different than you.
You did.
Like
He did.
picking cotton, whether you were
And the terms and conditions
after, like,
the terms and conditions that came with that,
Yeah.
some of my folks, that's what they did.
right.
Yeah.
That's why I mentioned it.
Yeah, they were
'Cause-
sharecroppers. So we know that history. But for a younger generation who don't know, we're trying to provide those
Yes.
analysis, because there are folks all over the world who have lived under dictatorships and defeated them.
Yeah, it's
And that's
possible.
within living memory.
Yeah.
So that's why, we focus on Northern Ireland, we focus on South Africa. We want the next one would probably be South Korea, then Indonesia. Then we're going to talk to folks in Argentina. Then we want to come back, and do a sweep of folks from the Congo, and then the northern part of Africa, Tunisia, in particular, some comrades there. So we can share some of these lessons with a U.S. audience, so folks just don't think it's gloom and doom, and recognize that, while it's bad for us and it's something that we're not accustomed to, most people all over the world are like, are y'all serious?
Right, but that's what I'm saying. It's like the sacrifice. Like in the part of the Jackson Rising remix Redux book, one of the pieces that I wrote ends with a question for us all here in the US, and even, for me, it's like, how much are you willing to sacrifice? And if you read it, you'll hear the different sacrifices that I mentioned. But like, I I want to be that Christian right now that's fire and brimstone. Like you're talking about hope, and I'm that person too. Like I like being a cheerleader, and it is so important. And for whatever reason, for many reasons, right now I'm like, that's the that's the image that I want to be, which you don't see at all, do you?
Yeah, no. Well, I want to end. There's two things. One that Sungu made me think about. I got Bobby Sands in my mind, and for those who don't know, Bobby Sands was one of the leader of the hunger strikes in the north of Ireland. He was one of the leaders of a pretty significant struggle that happened there in the early 1980s. And one of his famous quotes, one that I grew up with, is that it said like our revenge will be the children of the laughter of our children, right? In the commentary about what does victory ultimately kind of look like from the sacrifice that they were making, and
our revenge will be the laughter of our children.
Be the laughter of our children, so when you were talking about love and life and what the purpose, joy, and is to get back to that and to focus on that. And then for us, I just want to leave, we always, that old famous saying, that you touched on, pessimism, you did. Pessimism of the intellect, optimism of the will. That's ultimately
that one. I need to write that down.
Yeah, it's most often attributed to Gramsci. It's older than that, but pessimism of the intellect and optimism of the will. I think that's where we ultimately have to be. And again, back to how do we impact, shifts in our people's thinking so that we can put ourselves in a more directed way of shaping the outcome of history. Because it is the people who make history, but we don't make it cold, cloth. We make it with the tools and the knowledge and information that we have at our hands. So we have to arm ourselves with more information to make better choices.
For the generations X, Y, Z, and our generation, that's kind of like the hip hop. I don't remember what my generation's name is exactly, besides latchkey kids, but like it's like do or die, or the sports analogy of like, what is it, win or go home, like
well, that's basically what we at.
Right. And the Haitian Revolution and what they did and what they built and the fort that still exists that I've never even been to. It's like we fight and we
either win
or we lose. And that's exactly what you said, Sungu, about like what is the thinking of not only your organizations, but like this
the movement,
this left alliance. And I mean, the reason why I feel strongly about this is because I've actually been to Kenya a couple of times. I mentioned in the beginning being at the activist residency, and then also Tanzania. And I'm actually like, I feel proud. Like I feel proud that y'all are doing this and seizing this moment. And I hope I wish the best for you all.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, we're gonna pick it up again, Sungu. For more, there's another series that I'm gonna be a part of beginning in 2026. So folks be on the lookout for that, called Shifting Focus. And
Sure.
we want to do a deeper, real interrogation about our vision. Like what is the socialist vision really entail, particularly in light of the historical shortcomings that our projects experienced in the 20th century, right? We want to interrogate them ruthlessly, not to cast any blame, but we want to make sure that we don't repeat the mistakes of the past, and we learn from it. So there's as much to learn from our failures as our successes, and So we're going to be dealing with that and want to interrogate that. So be on the lookout for
Shifting
that,
focus.
for shifting focus. That's going to start in January.
Trump, I do mind dying.
Yeah, well, those are going to keep going on. Both of them will be happening as long as there's a Trump we're going to have to deal with, and as long as we are able to move ourselves, under the increasing amount of threats that our movement here is facing, which is real. But Sungu, want to thank you as always, comrade, for joining us, taking out the time. For everybody else, I appreciate you coming on. For folks who got a chance to listen, definitely keep tuning in to the ISE series. We're going to keep doing more focus series this next couple of ones. The conversation that we will unfortunately had to postpone with Roland Ngam from South Africa. We're going to do that later on in the month, the 21st of this month, so be on the lookout for that. We're going to have Oyoo giving us kind of an update on some stuff about what's going on in the Gambia and struggles in and around Senegal and another part of the Sahel region. So yeah, be on the lookout for that, and thank everybody. And for folks who catch this later on, I have to borrow something from Tonda Seasway to be a better promoter of these works. So please was it like, share, and subscribe.
Yeah.
To the ISE channel. And
gotta ring that bell.
How do folks, we'll close with this, how do folks get in contact with WAMCO and some of the other things that you are involved in, Sungu, and how could folks stay abreast of some of your work and like this presidential campaign that you're launching?
Mwamco is, and I'll type it on the chat, but Mwamco, which the organization I'm part of, the Pan-African Popular Pedagogy Collective, you can follow it on social media, on Facebook, X, Instagram, at Mwamco Africa. Sorry, at Mwamco Africa or at Mwamco_Africa. And for the presidential campaign, you can follow us on across the social media platforms, Sungu Oyoo, or if you check out Comrade President, that's our official page. And for the Kenya Left Alliance, you can check us out on Facebook and X, Kenya Left Alliance, or KLA. Yes.
And then the recording, it actually has the spelling of Mwamco Africa. So
yes,
that'll be there for folks to be able to.
Many thanks for inviting me to the conversation, Kali and Saki. Thanks to the Institute for Social Ecology. But now I have to run.
All right, brother. See you soon.
Good night.
All right.
All right. Cool.
Bye.